Russian President Putin is facing criticism in Russia for not doing enough to end the war in Ukraine, and now he's facing pressure to do something about the war in Iran. Now, some say that he should be doing in Ukraine what the U.S. and Israel is doing in Iran, which I guess is balls to the walls, right? Can I say balls?
You did.
I did. Yeah, balls to the walls. I don't know if that's a good template, though. I don't know if you want to do it our way, if you just listen to Colonel McGregor. But on Russian talk shows now, they're saying President Putin is dependent on his personal relationship with Donald Trump, and that's why he hasn't ended the war in Ukraine. That stalled peace negotiations, which are heavily criticized there. So what can Russia even do in Iran while it still is entangled in its own war at home? Russian leaders are saying they will do something, namely stop the flow of energy to anyone who is supporting this war. Here is Sergei Lavrov saying exactly that.
Our strategic partners, and will continue to maintain dialogue with these countries, and we'll do our best to, including with other countries of the international community, in the United Nations Security Council, and the United Nations General Assembly. We'll do everything to create an atmosphere that will make this operation impossible.
Okay, so we're going to talk in a minute about what that means. President Putin is saying he also can stop the flow of energy to Europe. He was sort of spitballing in this interview. You can look that up if you want, but it is in Russian. Why would he do this? Possibly because Europe will be dragged into the conflict because most of them are in NATO. Even though many NATO members are saying they don't want anything to do with this, namely Italy and Spain, they may not have a choice. Now, earlier today, Iranian foreign minister said this when asked about how Russia and China are helping.
Are your allies Russia and China helping you?
Well, they are supporting us politically and otherwise.
Are they supporting you militarily?
Well, military cooperation between Iran and Russia is not a secret. You know, we have worked with each other in the past, and that has continued. And will continue. I guess.
And they are actively helping you in this war.
Well, they are. They have always helped us.
So I'm gonna understand that to mean yes, that they are actively assisting you in this war.
Well, I'm not going to give the details of our cooperation with other countries right in the middle of the war.
Okay. What does that mean exactly, helping? Where does Russia stand? Joining us to discuss is Jim Jatras. He's a former State Department official and an expert in U.S.-Russia relations. Good to see you, Jim. Thank you for offering your expertise. So what do you... Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you
Natali
go ahead.
Clayton.
You take it.
No, Natali Clayton, thank you. Doug McGregor, tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. Thank you.
All right, game on. What do you think? Give us the overall.
Well, I think you actually outlined it very well in your introduction. A lot of this has to do with how President Putin views President Trump. I mean, when we talk about U.S.-Russia relations and what's the nexus between the two major theaters right now, Ukraine and Iran. It's these two New York flim-flam artists, Witkoff and Kushner, that the Russians have been repeatedly meeting with so they can talk about big business deals and land and money and Vladi baby, just think of the tax write-off and whatever kind of nonsense they're trying to sell the Russians on a ceasefire. The Russians have been polite with this. Maybe they even took it seriously because they say, hey, wait, these guys have got a direct line to Trump. And now I think, even though the mirage that there's some kind of a deal possible with Trump, with the United States, that the United States could possibly negotiate in good faith. Even Vladimir Putin cannot believe that anymore. He was disappointed that he thought he had a handshake deal with Trump over Ukraine at Anchorage, the spirit of Anchorage. Now we see these same two guys engaged in this treachery, and I think that's the only word for it, pretending to negotiate with the Iranians while we set up to just kill them, to knock them out, to decapitate them. So I think you're right that the pressure on President Putin to finally drop this illusion that he can negotiate a deal with his friend President Trump is finally gone, that the pressure is going to be on him very strongly to move forthrightly in Ukraine. Again, the question you asked, why aren't they launching a decapitation strike of that sort against the Kiev regime that we see Israel and the United States repeatedly employing against, not only Hezbollah and also trying against Hamas, negotiations in Doha, and now doing it twice with respect to Iran. So I think the bellwether we're going to see here is twofold. One is, will the Russians change their behavior in Ukraine? And secondly, when Trump wants to declare a win and get out, which I think is his only way out of this at this point, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, at the maximum before he's supposed to go see President Xi in Beijing, at some point when he wants to get out and say, okay, we've accomplished our mission, another win for Trump, I've solved my 84th war, do the Iranians let him off the hook? When the Russians and the Chinese see that here's the United States with our, mammary gland caught in a ringer, do they want to let us go now? And if Iran is getting the advantage, we've exhausted our interceptors, do they want to keep pounding us away? And do the Russians and the Chinese see an opportunity to bleed us white in Iran the same way we tried to bleed the Russians white in Ukraine?
Well, the big medical hack of 2025 was several peer-reviewed studies identifying the direct connections between anti-parasitic medications having off-label benefits fighting a wide variety of cancers. And this makes sense. The connection between tumor growth and parasites has been known for years. While the CDC remains silent about it, of course, they have finally admitted that millions of Americans suffer from parasitic infections that often go undetected or undiagnosed. That's why Dr. Peter McCullough, Chief Scientific Officer at the Wellness Company and the world's most published cardiologist, says these studies make clear that you should do at least one medical-grade parasite cleanse annually. The Wellness Company's proprietary USA compound, which is ivermectin and menbenzidol, is a doctor-prescribed gold standard combination dose designed to help the body eliminate parasites and other incredible benefits. Each bottle contains 90 capsules, enough for a complete 21-day cleanse. So this high-strength formula can be found at your local pharmacy, but the Wellness Company removes the red tape, making the process fully digital. All you do is you fill out a quick intake form, a doctor reviews it, and your medical-grade parasite cleanse arrives in a week. It's time for a new year and a new you. So head over to twc.health/redacted and use the code redacted to save $60 off plus free shipping. Again, that is twc.health/redacted to save $60 off plus free shipping. So Jim, the old saying, right? Don't get involved if your enemies are shooting themselves in the foot. Why in the world would Russia jump into this if the United States is incapacitating itself completely, running through its munitions right now, having to call CEOs of Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and all of these defense contractors to the White House in order to basically beg them to make more Tomahawk missiles because we've exhausted our supplies in Ukraine. So Putin could sort of sit back and sort of wait, circle the wagons, and watch as the United States really shoots itself in the foot here. Do you anticipate any change to the Ukraine war? Putin maybe doing something more, as the spring unfolds here, as the ground unfreezes and they start to move towards spring weather?
Clayton, one of the frustrating things about the Russians I've learned over several decades is that whatever you would do in their circumstances, they never do. And they do something else, you say, why the hell do they do that? So, yeah, there are an awful lot of people I know in Moscow from many sources have been pressing for a long time to have a change in strategy. And it seems that Vladimir Putin in particular, and there are some other people, Nabiullina, the head of the central bank and so forth, have been pressing, no, we have to be cautious. We have to show restraint. We have to keep the door open to negotiation. And if you look at the way they've been conducting the war, it has been what I call pedagogical. It has not been designed to achieve a military victory, but rather to force the other side to meet the minimal terms that they set out in June 2024, the 4 oblasts, Crimea, neutrality, and all that. And that was an illusion from the start. And I think, I'm not questioning the military competence of the Russian armed forces, but rather the political competence of understanding the mentality of people in the Western capitals who are really, let's be honest about it, cutthroats. I mean, they simply do not take honestly any prospect of negotiation. I don't know if the Russians have finally figured that out. I certainly would have if I were in their shoes a long time ago. You'd think now there's simply no excuse for President Putin to maintain this illusion of a negotiation. But I honestly don't know what they will do. I would think that at some point they will decide they've lost so many men. They're still under economic pressure from sanctions. Killing Ukrainians. I mean, these people are basically Russians anyway. That's still a loss for the Russians anyway. At some point, you decide why we keep losing people at this when we could end this war by destroying the Kiev regime. And I don't know if they will do that.
Can I follow up here? Because, I mean,
Sure.
So the one side, you got Ukraine, right, where they're obviously preoccupied, but the other side is this is barreling towards a world war. So
exactly, yes.
What exactly does the Russian relationship with Iran versus Israel? I mean, Putin had, over the 5 months ago, was talking about how many, Jewish Russians live in Israel. So the relationship is very muddy.
It is, and of course that has been damaged somewhat because of Israeli support for the Ukrainians. So that relationship is not what it was. Again, you get a lot of speculation in Russia, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about how strong the Chabad organization is in Russia, how much influence it has on Putin. People tell me it has influence, but not the same degree of, let's be honest about it, control that, big Jewish money and evangelical Christian Zionists have here in the United States over the political class in Washington, but it is a factor. How strong of a factor is, I don't know. And what are the countervailing? Remember, Putin is not a dictator. He's a manager. He's a manager over a rather diverse sense of a set of pressures and interests that he's trying to balance in some way. Back to the Iran thing, I think they have to worry about what Colonel McGregor said, that if the Iranians do press their advantage, that very well could lead to an Israeli nuclear response. That's something they obviously have to worry about. But they also have to consider that, okay, when the Americans are ready to declare a victory and go home, and do the Iranians step down, or do they say to themselves, if we step down, fine, we've survived. That's a victory of sorts. But that all it means is we're going to give the Americans and Israelis another chance to come back and hit them again in 6 months or a year after we've had a chance to reload. So, that's a dilemma for everybody involved.
Well, given what a shit starter the U.S. is, you can see why Russia would be kind of motivated, to help the Iranians either directly or indirectly. Yeah. And so and there's no deterrence now. They've been sanctioned to within an inch of their life. So what? The U.S. doesn't have the capacity to fight Iran and Russia at the same time militarily. So why the hell not? Right? Is that sort of their position of we can help the Iranians, but how direct do you think it will be?
In terms of helping the Iranians, I don't think the Russians would get directly involved if they can possibly avoid it. Now, there are some things they might do. For example, I understand that the Israelis have a submarine capability launch for their nuclear weapons. If that's the case, are the Israeli subs being shadowed by Russian subs, and will sink them if they think the Israelis are about to launch their nuclear weapons? That's the only place I can see the Russians would be directly involved militarily, although you can be sure that there are Russian personnel in Iran today with their air defense systems and maybe even piloting some of their aircraft.
Yeah, I guess that's the real question here. I mean, and you have the Chinese angle in all of this as well. Yeah. So in terms
I hadn't considered it. He made a good point about the meeting coming up with Xi Jinping. It will be very embarrassing for President Trump if he's still leading this bloody unsuccessful war and he meets in China.
He'll want to go to Beijing having declared himself a winner, and you'd think it would be in the Russian as well as the Iranian interest not to let him do that, and may also be in the Chinese interest not to do that. I mean, after all, the Chinese, what's their short-term interest? Turn the energy spigot back on. They want that back on. But both the Americans and the Israelis have made it clear they want this to be the showdown with the Iranians. They want to put an end to the Iranian threat. Well, you'd think that would work on the other side, too, that if the Iranians, backed up by the Russians and the Chinese, saying, we're going to drive the Americans out of the Middle East. We're going to crush Israel. We're going to get rid of all the American bases, force them to pull out. You'd think they don't want to go through this again in a few months, too, especially since the prospect for escalation might even be greater than. Again, it's a real tightrope. How much are you going to risk triggering a global conflict versus how much can you maybe reduce the prospects of a global conflict by finishing it now.
How about you want to bet? I'm not Polymarket, Jim, but I'm going to bet. I'll just lay down this bet right now that meeting with Xi Jinping
will get canceled.
Is going to get canceled. It's going to be postponed.
I think there's a very good chance of that, depending on how long this goes on. And again, there's so many imponderables here. We're getting propaganda from both sides. How badly degraded are the Iranian air defenses? We don't know. I've seen reports we've used the B-52s, which you think we would not want to use if there was any chance they could be shot down. But I don't know to what extent that's propaganda, that they're still firing standoff weapons, that they're not risking flying over Iranian airspace. There's so much we don't know about how this war is unfolding. And remember, it's still very young. And to what extent the Iranians have not seen any attrition in their capability to strike with drones and with ballistic missiles, but are simply waiting for the degradation of our interceptor force, where they can strike targets with impunity, and how far they won't want to push it. Which, as you say, we got a nuclear risk there.
Yeah. Jim Jotras, thank you so much. No one would rather talk to who's plugged in on the Russian side of things more than you. So thank you for your perspective on this. It is interesting now to see the President Putin throwing his hat into the rhetoric ring right now with all of this. Thanks so much, Jim. Great to see you.
Thank you.